Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, it is Friday, and you know what that means. It means it is time for another edition of Felony Friday right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Now, I have a really interesting guest lined up for you guys today, a man who is both a fingerprint expert and a fellow podcaster, and we got some really interesting stories to talk about and really interesting things about how the fingerprint process works that he's going to share with us today. But before I introduce my guest, I just want to ask a favor of you guys. I want to let you guys know a way that you can help us out here on Lions of Liberty. You can help us to grow the show. You can do this in a simple way, just by buying what you would normally buy through Amazon through our affiliate link. Now, you can do this by going to lionsofliberty.com/Amazon. It's not going to cost you anything more. When you use that link, we will get a small little kickback that will help us to continue to produce this outstanding content that you guys obviously enjoy because you're listening to this show. So please, think about doing that today. We really would appreciate it. Second, of course, this is episode number 30 of Felony Friday. So you know that means you can find the show notes with links to everything that we're going to talk about today at lionsofliberty.com/FF30. My guest today is Eric Ray. Eric has been a criminalist with the Arizona Department of Public Safety in the Latent Print Unit since 2007. He is a Certified Latent Print Examiner. Eric earned his BS in Biochemistry and Molecular and Cellular Biology from the University of Arizona. Eric is on the Editorial Board of the JFI on the Special Committee on Latent Print Probability Modeling. He is also the Treasurer and Webmaster for the Arizona Identification Council. Eric has published and presented extensively on reducing erroneous exclusions. And in his spare time, like I said, he co-hosts a podcast. The podcast is called the Double Loop Podcast, and it is a weekly show on fingerprint topics. Eric, welcome to Felony Friday.
Hello, everybody out there. Thank you for having me on the show. Glad to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, Eric. And, you know, my favorite part of having a podcast is getting to interview interesting people and getting to ask questions, you know, that I've had for years. For example, I've interviewed experts in the field of DNA evidence, in the field of false confessions, and I'm excited today to talk with you to learn about latent fingerprints. Before we do that, though, I do want to typically, with my Felony Friday guests, I get some background information first on you, so my Felony Friday audience can get to know you just a little bit better. So first off, we'll start at the beginning here. Where you're from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up mostly in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Before that, my dad was in the Air Force, so we bounced around a little bit. But then finally settled down here. Also went to school down in Tucson, like you read there in the intro. And I got married, have kids, and still here in the Phoenix area.
Okay, so how did you, after growing up in Phoenix, you said excuse me, you went to school in Arizona there. What got you interested, I guess, first of all, what got you interested in biochemistry and molecular and cellular biology? When did you decide to pursue that path?
In high school, I had a science teacher that was really interesting. And towards the end, it was like an optional class to take biochemistry for a semester. And it was mainly kind of like an intro to organic chemistry class for high school students. And I was really interested in that, decided to go further into that, in college. And from there, worked for a year or so doing cancer research at the lab that I worked at as a student. But then kind of realized that I'd either have to kind of go all the way and get a PhD or do something other than research. I really enjoyed that, but it just, when the family kind of started, it just, it wasn't going to work out. So I ended up actually working at the blood bank testing lab there. And then for a few years doing like industrial water purification before finally applying to the crime lab and getting hired on there. So with the lab that I work for, the way it works is there's an opening. They just put out this notification, and dozens or hundreds of people apply, and they start sifting through. And then when they eventually get a list, a ranked list, depending on how well you did on the on the tests and the interview process. And then they just come down and say, all right, we have a spot in this lab for this position with this field. Are you interested? So it's not specific. I didn't apply specifically to work in latent prints. I just applied to be a forensic scientist there. And so when they said, are you interested in fingerprints? I said, sure, absolutely. I had no idea, no background. First day, most lay people or lawyers probably knew more than I did on my first day. And pretty quickly found out that I really enjoyed the puzzle solving aspect of that. And I was really good at it. So, from there, it's kind of become, my passion to work in this field and be involved in all sorts of different things, from, my actual job to all these other committees and programs I'm a part of.
That's really interesting. So you didn't actually apply for a position in latent fingerprint forensics.
No.
You just applied overall, and then they kind of asked you, do you want to work here? So I guess a question I would have about that is, did you have an interest in, I guess you obviously had an interest in criminal justice then to go down this path.
Right. That was an interest that I had, as I was kind of getting out of college, looking around to where I wanted to make my career. That was one of the things I kept going back to and looking at. And, like I said, I did these other things for a little while, and it just didn't quite fit with what I wanted to do. And then when I applied, I thought I'd end up in toxicology because of the work I had done at the blood bank, or in the DNA section because of some of the work I had done in the cancer research lab. But they said, our opening is in fingerprints. Do you want it? And I said, yes, absolutely. And turns out, I kind of lucked out, because now knowing what I know now, I'd much rather be in fingerprints than in toxicology or DNA.
What's the reasoning for that?
Well, the toxicology, it's a lot of, you just kind of load up the machine and, push go. It's a lot of just every sample's the same. You get a blood tube in, you run the blood sample, and the machine gives you a result. And that's just, that's what I got tired of at the blood bank, was that it was just so kind of mind-numbingly dull. After, the challenge of understanding and getting good at using the equipment and that kind of thing, it just got dull for me. And DNA is just a different thing. It's such a big section, at least in our lab, and it's a whole different set of challenges, to go about, working through all the different tests and samples and all the different rules that they have to work through. And Latent's just seems to be, it's me solving the puzzle. It's not like a machine that I'm entering data into and an answer's being spit back out.
I think I can definitely relate to that. In my day job, I've done different things over the years. Previously, I guess a couple of years ago, I was stuck in a position where I was always analyzing these big construction schedules, and every day was like the last one. I'd come in, I'd be looking at these schedules and updating these schedules, and looking at different float paths and whatnot, things like that. But there was nothing exciting. Now I'm doing something a little bit different, a little more exciting with risk analysis stuff. But I think I can relate to where you're coming from with that. One thing I'm curious about, so you just applied for this position, you said you wanted it, you start working there. How much training was there before that led up to when you were, let go and set free to start analyzing and looking at some fingerprints?
Yeah, so there's no bachelor's or master's degree in fingerprints, and forensic labs kind of know that going in. So for myself and most people that get hired, these labs know that you're going to be basically useless for the first year or so. So it was about 15 months before I was actually set loose to, quote unquote, work a case on my own. There's still, we still have so many quality assurance procedures that there's reviews throughout the entire process. But it was that long of training both in-house with experienced examiners and going to, half a dozen outside training courses by leading experts in the field and a big conference to bolster the information and training that I got within the organization. So it was that whole process before, and then a couple tests along the way to demonstrate that I was capable of not screwing anything up before I was released and signed off to do actual casework.
Okay. So let's just jump right into this, talking about latent fingerprints.
Sure.
Just some questions I've always wanted to ask. You see the crime scenes, the crime shows on TV of, the detective coming in and dusting the scene for fingerprints and, finding something and taking their time. And I don't know, what do they put? You put tape down or how you get it. So how does that all work? And I guess how realistic is that depicted on television?
It's kind of... Some things are kind of correct and other things are just wildly wrong. I'm not allowed to watch CSI anymore because my wife told me that I yell at the TV too much. So a couple episodes that really stuck out for me one is when what's the guy that played Morpheus in the Matrix movies? He was cast into CSI, the Las Vegas one, in one of those later seasons to be in charge of the lab. He was a doctor and had all his qualifications, but he'd never done the scene work before. So they take him
Lawrence
out.
Fishburne,
that's it. They take him out to this crime scene and they give him powder and a brush. And the episode starts with him dusting for fingerprints when he's never done it before. And that would never happen. And, he's kind of trying to get the fingerprint off this knob and they say, oh, you've used too much powder. Let's go try to look for fingerprints somewhere else. That is just... It's just not the way it works. So in general, yes, the fingerprint powder, it's basically carbon black. It's kind of similar to, copier toner, really fine. It gets everywhere. And you kind of get your brush into it. Usually on the TV shows, they're very clean white brushes, but in reality, the brushes would be, already all black from other uses in previous scenes. And it's kind of a light twist as you deposit more and more powder onto the print. Out here in Arizona, where I'm at, it also might involve, there's such a low humidity, you might have to rehydrate the print in order for the powder to stick well. So you may just be breathing kind of like a deep huff of breath onto it. Obviously, this would be after any DNA collection had been done, so that you're not breathing your own DNA onto the evidence. But that is really only for things that are like cars or outside of cars or windows, things that are hard or glass, shiny, the things that when you look at it, you can see fingerprints on it, like your car windows. Lots of things that you may collect at a crime scene are things you don't necessarily readily see fingerprints on. So those are just collected, bagged up, and sent into the lab for analysis in the lab itself and not actually at the crime scene.
So another question about you'll see on TV shows or in movies, someone uses a gun to shoot someone and then they'll just wipe the gun clean and put it down. How easy is it to wipe your fingerprints off of something? Do they just come right off?
More or less, yes. It depends a lot on the surface. So for your glass window of your car, that's a pretty easy one for anyone to test out themselves. If you kind of look through the window in the right light, you can see the fingerprint really well. And just wiping over it with a cloth or even just with your hand again, you can kind of get an idea of how much pressure it takes to wipe off. Now, guns and ammo are actually fairly poor receivers for fingerprints. It's definitely possible to leave fingerprints on them, but it's not as common as the TV shows make it out to be. On TV, it's basically guaranteed if you touch a gun, guaranteed you've left a fingerprint on it. And that's just not the case, mostly because the part of the gun that you would hold on to, the grip, is textured. And it's made that way so that you can grip it. So usually when we're processing items like that, they'll have the DNA analyst collect DNA from the textured, grippy parts because those might hold on to skin cells. And it's the smooth, shiny parts that we do for fingerprints. So the magazine is typically a little shinier, so that's pretty good. A nice chrome revolver would be really great for fingerprints, but like a Glock handgun is a really dull gunmetal finish. It's kind of even textured, so it's way more difficult to get prints off of that kind of surface. Now, there's a whole other section of items of evidence called porous items, like paper. And that's also a really good receiver because the sweat from your finger would soak into the paper or envelope or whatever other kind of porous substance that it is. And then that you can't really wipe that away because it's soaked in. It's the sweat has invisibly soaked into the paper, and you can't really wipe it off.
It's interesting. So I guess a follow-up question to that, and I know the answer is probably going to be depends on the surface somewhat. I mean, say you have a solid surface and you have pretty stable conditions, good humidity. How long will a fingerprint stay where it is? Will it stay until it's affected in some way? Will a fingerprint naturally degrade over time at all?
In general, you can say that they tend to degrade over time. There's extreme examples, like I've heard of old documents from like 50 years beforehand being processed, usually with paper. The chemical that we use to process is called ninhydrin. It's a amino acid stain. You have to be careful not to get it on your actual skin because it'll turn your skin purple. But it then turns the prints purple on the paper. And I've heard of prints like that lasting for like 50 years. There was a famous case in England where a guy was, well, I don't think it's been proven yet, but I would say that he was wrongfully convicted of a burglary because his fingerprints were found in this vase. And my best and other fingerprint examiners' best guess is that he had actually been at a shop looking at vases to purchase to put in his shop, like going to like a warehouse store to get stuff to put in his shop. And this was one of the vases he touched. That had eventually been sold and bought by somebody whose house was later robbed, and then they found that print, and this was years later. So under controlled circumstances, they can stick around for a while, but if left outside in the weather and blowing dust and dirt and rain, then they will then tend to degrade. But it's tough to, it's not really one of those things you can put an actual physical number on it, because there's no way to tell what happened to it. What may have rubbed up against that surface in the intervening days, weeks, or months, or years.
Well, that's really interesting. So you talked a little bit about how one of the reasons that you enjoyed working with latent fingerprints, working in this field, is because there's some different things. There's manual. It's maybe a little more labor intensive. It's going to challenge you. So what is the process for comparing two fingerprints? Does it come down to the person like yourself analyzing them when you're looking for a match of fingerprints? I'm sure today that, with technology that is involved to some degree, but can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how the process has changed, how you've seen it change over your time working in the field?
Sure. Yeah, when it comes down to it, it really is, a person looking at two fingerprint impressions. So just kind of overview of that. It starts off, you'll look at just the unknown or the questioned or the latent print. And you'll look through there and when you're looking for features that you can compare. And that can be large scale features like the overall pattern that the print makes, or cores or deltas. Cores are, if you look at your own fingers, it's kind of the rounded part right in the middle. And the deltas are kind of down into the sides. They look like kind of like Ys. It's just three lines coming together. But those are features that would be, more or less in everyone's fingerprint. So the features that we're really looking for that are specific to a certain person are the minutiae. And these are basically either ridge endings or bifurcations. So if you look again really closely at your fingerprints, you can see the little lines there run along, and then one of them will stop. That would be a ridge ending. Or one will split into two ridges, and that's a bifurcation. So first I'll do is I'll go through and mark as many of those as I can see throughout the unknown print. Just, okay, I see one here, and I see one here, and, usually you can mark anywhere between usually 10 to 20 or 30. If you get much past 30 or 40, you may just decide to stop because you've kind of reached an overwhelming number of points, and that's going to be enough to make a decision either way. And then you'll put down beside that your known print. Now, you can get that in one of two ways. If the officers have a suspect, you may just get in the suspect's fingerprints and put that right next to this latent print. But you may also not have a suspect in a case. For me, it seems to be about 50-50 of whether we have a suspect or not. If there's not a suspect, then we can enter that latent into the APHIS system. That's where technology really, gets involved here. And that's really doing the same thing again, marking out all these minutiae, but also marking the direction that they're flowing. So that on this computer space, you can think of it like a Cartesian map. You have an X coordinate, a Y coordinate, and then a theta angle direction that the ridge feature there is facing. And then what APHIS does, and this is really where TV gets it wrong, is on TV, all of a sudden they start flashing, faces on the screen, and then all of a sudden one of them pops up. Well, first of all, that would be really annoying to have a computer just making noise and flashing faces at you all day. But, I guess works on TV. But
that'd be cool, like one time.
Right.
Like,
and you're like, okay.
I don't need to see all these faces keep flashing at me.
I want to enter another one. Can you work on more than one at a time? Yeah. So what it does actually, though, is takes those points that you've marked and then compares them to every set of points in all the fingers in the database that you're searching, which is pretty incredible that they've been able to program this to happen, and it actually works. But all those comparisons each get a score of how closely they match up. And then the computer sorts all those potential candidates with the scores and gives me the top. I used to ask for like 25, but now the systems are so good, I just ask for 5, the 5 top candidates through our state system, and then I'll do it again through the federal system, which is, I think we're up to 100 million different people or 1 billion different fingers. Because everyone's got 10 fingers. And I then look at those top candidates that's brought back to me, and about maybe a quarter or a third of the time, one of those to me looks like it matches up. The other 2/3, 3/4 of the time, none of them match. So I just say, okay, none of these match. So getting back to the process that I do, now that I have this exemplar, this known print, I put it side by side. I'll look generally at one of the big features, like I had said before, the core or the delta, and start there in the known print. And from there, I start looking at the different minutiae that are there. So, okay, I see maybe a ridge ending that if I count 2 over to the left, there's a ridge ending, and then my known print 2 to the left, okay, it's there. So then I'll go look back at my latent and see, well, what else do I have nearby? Okay, there's a bifurcation if I go 3 ridges up. So then in my known, okay, 1, 2, 3, yep, there's a bifurcation here too. And just keep doing that over and over again, to see, in the case of an identification, that everything matches up, that all of the minutiae have a corresponding minutiae in the known, and that they all have the same unit relationship between each other, the same number of intervening ridges. And the final step then is the decision time. Now, if I'm looking at that core delta, look, okay, 2 ridges to the left, there should be a ridge ending here, and there's not. I may double check that with a couple, going to the right or looking next to the delta instead. And seeing that difference means, okay, it's an exclusion. If I see all those features lining up throughout both prints, okay, then that would be an identification. And then the other decision I could reach is inconclusive. And that would be either there's not really enough features corresponding to, say, identification, and there's not really those obvious differences that I see to say exclusion, or it could be that the exemplars are incomplete. I just don't have the right section of finger or palm to compare. So for one of those 3 reasons, really, I might be inconclusive. And the final step is just handing it off to somebody else to double check my work in a verification.
So when it's an identification, it's not there's not a degree of probability attached to it or anything. It's you identify that these match, you pass it off to be checked, someone checks it, they confirm, verify the match, and then that's a identification. Is that correct? It's
an extremely difficult problem. People have been working on trying to come up with a probability for fingerprint comparisons since the 1890s. Wow. It is a difficult problem to solve. I've talked a lot with people that are working on this problem. One of them, if users want to look up specifics on actual published articles that deal with this, one of them is Dr. Cedric Newman, who's up in South Dakota right now. He's from Europe somewhere. He's got a crazy accent. But he's done a lot of papers looking at this. And even he is recognizing how difficult a problem this is to solve. So one way to put this is, okay, so with DNA, it's actually set up perfectly for statistics. Every person can have 2 copies of that gene, one from your mom, one from your dad. And they can then measure out in the population how many people have this exact specific thing. Usually it's a repeat of letters. So do you have, in this section, do you have 8 copies or do you have 9 copies in a row of these letters? And you can just start counting people, and they have this exact same thing in each person. And you're dealing with a molecule that's linear, one-dimensional, and there's no in-between. There's one letter, then the next letter, then the next letter. They're like integers. It's at 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. With fingerprints, you're looking at your finger. It's a 3-dimensional object that you've then pressed down onto a 2-dimensional surface to make this transfer. And that all of these features, they don't just happen in a repeatable way. Any of those features can be facing any direction and appear at any point in this XY coordinate, with not just at the integers of 1, 2, or 3, but at any decimal point even across this map. So it's just a multiple times more complex problem to solve. People are still working on it, but we don't have a reproducible way right now to give a probability.
In this world we live in of large data and quantify everything, maybe fingerprints just aren't something that can be quantified.
Yeah, and I mean, there's giant databases, that they've been working on, like I said, with millions and millions of fingers, but it's just hasn't been solved yet. It may at one point get there, but to put listeners' minds at rest, the biggest study that's been done so far, this is published in 2011, I believe, looked at accuracy of how accurate latent print examiners are when they reach this identification decision. And this was like 169 different examiners. Each examiner did 100 comparisons. About 60 of each of those comparisons were IDs. So with all those thousands of decisions that were made, when the examiner said ID, they were correct 99.8% of the time. That's before verification happened. So if with that study, you gave it to another just random person in that mix, nobody made the same mistake. So theoretically, every mistake would have been caught in that study.
Theoretically, right? Because there have been some cases recently that have made the news, and 99.8% of the time, I mean, that's incredibly accurate, but as Jim Carrey would say, so you're telling me there's a chance, right?
Exactly. I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies of all time. Yes, there is a chance.
The case that comes to mind for me, and I know you know about it,
yes,
because we talked about it in the pre-show chat, but I forgot about this. I wrote before Felony Friday was a podcast, it was an article I wrote every Friday for about 2 years, and I wrote about this in December of 2015, the Melissa Nayland case. She went on a tour in the county jail, in Inyo County Jail, and she was going through security just on a tour. They took her fingerprints, and she was flagged as there being a warrant out for her arrest for a felony in Indiana, in Dearborn, Indiana. So they arrested her, and at the time that I wrote this, she was still being detained. I believe she hadn't been extradited to Indiana. I'm not sure if she ever was.
No, she was.
But eventually she was cleared of it. So can you talk through, I mean, I've listened to one of your previous podcasts before on this. Can you talk through this a little bit, what happened here?
Yeah, this happened in December 2015. So it's 6-7 months old. I haven't heard any updates recently of anyone kind of explaining exactly what happened, but I can kind of go through from what I know of how these computer systems work and stuff, what might have happened. So she was in jail for 2 weeks, and she got her prints rolled when she went on this tour. And generally, when that happens, the computer sends your prints into the state database, and it gets compared against everybody there. And this is a little bit different kind of world. This is the 10 print world, where you're looking at 10 full fingers, not the latent prints, which are usually a part of just one finger. So mistakes in the 10 print world are incredibly rare because of just the amount of information that they have to look at. And they're usually actually turn out to be more clerical errors, like the wrong person's name was typed into the computer when the prints were rolled or something like that. In this case, though, it looks like her print was sent through California, no problem. And then it was sent to the FBI to check against the national database. And when it was there, again, this is just me now kind of guessing a little bit. It seems like her print had a fairly high score against another person, this person from Indiana. So that information was sent back to California. Now, what's supposed to happen at this point is that there's supposed to be a technician that then looks at the two fingerprints to say whether or not this relatively high score actually means that it's a match. And it doesn't look like that actually happened, that they just got this message back from the FBI and then assumed, oh, somebody must have looked at it. But again, my impression is that it was just an automated response, and then that people at Inyo County didn't follow through with what they were supposed to do of actually verifying it. So after 2 weeks, her husband is like going out of his mind, finding all these records that proves that she was in like San Francisco at the time that the arrest had taken place in Indiana. It was like, payroll stubs and all this stuff. And finally, he convinces the judge in California to get somebody in Indiana to actually compare these fingerprints. I actually talked to the guy in Indiana. He was in a class that I taught out there last year. And he did the comparison and said, I can kind of see that there were some similarities in just like basic pattern, but he said it was very easy to tell that they were two different people. And then after that news came back to California, she was set free. So that's kind of my impression of and partial guessing as to what happened in that process. But it's crazy that this person that really was not living a criminal lifestyle, that shouldn't have been, suspected at all, that no one just bothered to look at the fingerprints. It would have just taken 5 seconds just to look at them and say, okay, no, these are actually different people. And then it would have all been cleared up. It's just that no one bothered to do that, which is mind-boggling for me. I don't understand why that wouldn't have happened much quicker.
It's scary, and it makes me not want to go on any tours of any jails anytime soon. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe one of these one in a million things. I can't imagine this occurring, with any kind of frequency. But yeah, definitely something to be aware of. And if you're ever, accused of something, especially with the 10-print side, which is just so much easier to deal with, and you know that this wasn't you, but they say that the fingerprints match, find somebody to do it or get a copy of them, or just insist that they actually review that and look at it again. That's, for the most part, when you look at fingerprint errors that have occurred, which are very infrequent over time, but virtually all of them have been cleared up by having another expert look at the comparison and then flag it and say, okay, this is not correct.
Okay, another case I just want to touch on real briefly. I know we're running short on time here, but this is actually a woman in 2002 was convicted of murder, murder of her neighbor. This is in Indiana also, so I don't know what's going on in Indiana. So she had her conviction reversed, fortunately, but there was a faulty fingerprint analysis. This was Lena Kanan.
Yes.
And you're familiar with this case as well.
Yeah, very familiar.
What happened here?
So it came to light with an examiner named Kathleen Bright Birnbaum, who's actually from Arizona. I've known her for a number of years now. And she was asked by the defense to finally take a look at this fingerprint after the Lena Kanan had been in prison for a number of years. So it turns out what happened is that this elderly lady had been murdered in Indiana. They collected all this evidence, and one of the things they collected was a prescription pill bottle. They developed a fingerprint on it, and they were ready to get it compared. And I believe they'd actually sent that fingerprint off to the Indiana State Lab. I also know a lot of the people there. There's some top experts in the field that actually work in Indiana. And I don't know if the local agency was just worried that it would take too long or what, but a detective from the neighboring agency had said, oh, I can do this. Hey, get the fingerprint and send it to me. He had gone to a 40-hour or 1 week training class at the FBI, something like 30 years previously, and had not been doing regular comparisons of fingerprints since then. Even then, it was just a completely inadequate training. But he insisted that he could do it, so the agency where the homicide took place let him do it, and he identified Ms. Kanan as the source of this fingerprint, and basically entirely on that identification, she was convicted. And then finally, after 5 or 6 years, this examiner out of Tucson, working privately in her spare time, reviewed this comparison and pretty quickly saw that it was an error. And she had been comparing, latent fingerprints virtually every day for like 30 years. She was a very well-seasoned expert in this field. So then she finally brought it forward. The defense, told all this information to the prosecutor. To their credit, the prosecutor's office, as soon as they found out, had it double-checked by the Indiana State Police, and then the prosecutor and defense both petitioned the judge to have Ms. Kanan released. So even though this was definitely a screw-up initially, I guess to their credit, they didn't drag their feet and try to keep her in jail. As soon as the prosecutors figured out or found out that this was a problem, they also petitioned the judge to have her released. So the moral of that story is making sure that your expert's actually an expert. It isn't just some detective that likes to play with fingerprints in his spare time because he took a class 30 years ago for 1 week.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it seems like the common theme is it's not a problem with, fingerprinting. It's the human element, people getting in the way or causing procedural errors where there shouldn't be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a failure by the prosecutors to rely on this guy, on that agency to not send it to the experts at the state, on the judge to allow this guy to testify even though he wasn't qualified, and on the original defense attorneys for not hiring their own expert or challenging this guy more on the stand initially. It was just a failure all around.
Yeah, well, at least they caught it, and this poor woman's not still in jail.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you about your business. You're a busy man. As I said, you have you have a consulting business, a training business, and also you're working in the lab, and you have the podcast. So if you could just talk a little bit about maybe the reasons why you started your latent fingerprint training business and your consulting business.
So first with the podcast, if anyone wants to listen to us, we've been up for about 3 years now. I've got 130 some odd episodes. If you just search the internet or your podcasting app for Double Loop Podcast, that'll get you there. And
we'll link to it in the show notes as well.
And you'd mentioned it before of just kind of giving an idea of how to do the comparisons. I'll give you a link also for a good YouTube video of how to compare fingerprints. And even I've got a Google Drive folder with some examples that people can play with if they're interested as well.
Cool.
But for the training business, I do training for other latent print experts, and it really focuses on the exclusion decision. Most of the field has been really focused on identification since its beginning 100 years ago, and now there's more of a focus on exclusions. And with that study I had mentioned, our error rate for identifications was fantastic, but our error rate for exclusions was actually fairly low. So that's the focus of this class. I've trained all the FBI examiners. Just a couple months ago, I even went to Taiwan and trained their examiners for the National Police there. So it's been pretty successful and got to see all different parts of the world now. For the consulting side, I hear stories like the Lena Kanan and the Melissa Nalen case, and it just makes me want to offer these same services and the expertise that I've built up to other people that might need it. So it's also at my website, both the training and the consulting side is at rayforensics.com. So if you know anybody that needs an expert eye to look at some fingerprints for defense or for a private case, it's not a criminal law, if it's like a civil case, you can go to that website and there's all my contact information there. I even make fingerprint artwork. Like, I'm obsessed about fingerprints. I just want to share that knowledge and that obsession with other people as well.
That's awesome. And I will link to all this stuff in the show notes.
Sure.
I also linked to the doctor you talked about in South Dakota, Cedric Newman,
yes.
Was it?
Yeah.
I'll link to his work as well. Really an interesting conversation today, I think, Eric. And I know from my perspective, if I ever find myself in any trouble, if I'm falsely accused of a crime, I'm giving you a call. Okay.
Right.
It's going to be one of my first phone calls.
Sounds good. If you get a chance to actually look at the samples I have on that folder, it actually is really fun. If you like doing like Sudoku or the old Minesweeper game, this is the same, for at least for me, it's the same part of the brain that I use for this. It's actually fun. So hopefully people get a chance to do that as well.
Maybe it can be the new Sudoku.
Exactly.
You can make an app for it. Yeah.
Hey, that's my idea, okay? No stealing.
Sorry.
All right.
All right, Eric. Well, thank you for spending some time with the Felony Friday audience. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you for having me on, and glad to be able to share all this with everyone listening.
All right, thank you. What an interesting interview this was today with Eric Ray. Going into this, I knew that I had some questions, especially with the two cases we talked about how it's possible for someone to be falsely implicated with their fingerprints or to be convicted of murder based on fingerprint analysis. And it was interesting that it came down to, it was human error. It was some maybe bureaucratic error or procedural error. It didn't have anything to do with fingerprint technology or anything like that. Another aspect that I thought was really interesting, and Eric talked about it, that he really enjoys the work of comparing fingerprints. It's like solving a puzzle. So I really do want you, for that reason, check out the show notes for today, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. Before I do that, I really wanted you guys to check out Eric's website, rayforensics.com. At that website, you'll be able to find links to all of his training courses that he offers there, the consulting services, and of course his podcast, the Double Loop podcast. You can also find that, of course, by just going to iTunes, searching Double Loop, and it'll pop right up for you. I really encourage you to check it out. There's a lot of interesting stuff that they do talk about on that podcast. So be sure to check out the show notes page as well, because Eric sent me a video that I will include in the show notes page, which is going to actually go through step by step on how fingerprints are compared. So I think it's going to be a really cool video to watch and educational for myself and hopefully for you guys too. If you get a chance to watch it, I really do encourage that. Guys, if you're still listening to the show at this point, if you're listening to me talk, that means that you're probably liking it a little bit, which I really appreciate, and we really appreciate here at Lions of Liberty that you spent some time with us today to learn about latent fingerprint analysis. But if you're enjoying it, please share it. We would really appreciate it if you could share the show on your social media platforms, and also be sure to follow the Lions of Liberty on Facebook and Twitter. You can also join our private Facebook group. All you have to do is search Lions of Liberty Forum on Facebook. The group will pop up and we will get you approved as quickly as possible. The group is really growing quickly. There's always new conversations every single day popping up, and a lot of great conversation, a lot of great discussion, and even a little bit of debate going on back and forth. It gets a little bit contentious at times, but it's fun. It's all good fun, and I really encourage you guys to check it out. We have 3 shows every week here at Lions of Liberty. And that can be a lot to keep track of, to remember to go and, download a show or go to our website and listen to the show. And if you want to do it that way, that's cool, that's great. If you want to listen on YouTube, that's cool, that's great also. More power to you. But if you just want it to come to your phone, if you just don't have to think about it and just have your phone automatically download it, you might want to think about subscribing to the Lions of Liberty podcast on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. It makes the process a lot easier. I do it for a lot of other podcasts and the Lions of Liberty podcast as well. Comes right to my phone. I just click on it and play it. It is wonderful. And that way, you can guarantee you won't miss out on any of our content every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. With Felony Friday, we have a new podcast. And you don't want to miss our new feature that we have. It's hosted by Mark Clare and Brian McWilliams, and it's called Mr. Johnson's Liberty Hood. And what they do is they break down the good and the bad of presidential candidate Gary Johnson's campaign. So you definitely don't want to miss that. It's freaking hilarious. I really enjoy it. A lot of our people in the forum are talking about it. We have hashtags going every week. A lot of funny stuff that they talk about on that show. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. Just one last note, and then I'll let you guys go. If you want to contact me, if you have any stories you want me to talk about, or someone you'd like me to interview on Felony Friday, you can contact me, Felony Friday, at lionsofliberty.com. So please think about doing that if you have something you want to hear. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.